guys, Pastor Jenna here. I just wanted to share with you another message from our series on the attributes of God, or what is God like. So today we're going to learn that God is sovereign. Sovereign means in control, or in control of everything, because God has power and is in control of everything that's going on in the world. Even though we each have our own free will, we're able to do what we want with our lives. Overall, God is in control of what's going on. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at our verse. God is sovereign or in control, and here's our verse found in Job chapter 42, verse 2. I know that you can do all things, and that no thought or purpose of yours can be restrained. Now, Job here is saying that he knows that God can do all things, and that nothing that God wants to do can be restrained or stopped or slowed down by any person or any other force. So that's really what sovereign means. And we're going to read a story today, or hear a little story about a man named David. And that is found in Psalm chapter 18. So you've probably heard about David before, especially if you come to my class, if you're part of the God's Kids group at my church. We've learned about David before. He was the second king of Israel. And David and Goliath is a very famous story. Even if you haven't heard a lot of Bible stories, you've probably heard the story of David and Goliath. So David was a famous young man because of what happened with him killing the giant Goliath. But what a lot of people didn't know as he was growing up was that the prophet Samuel had come and visited him when he was younger, and God had told Samuel that David would be the next king of Israel. So, as David grows up, he goes, he kills Goliath. King Saul loves him and has him come and stay with him in his palace and really cares for him like a son for a long time. King Saul didn't know that God had chosen David to be the next king of Israel. But as David grew up, he became a really good leader of the troops, a really good warrior, and he would lead his men out for King Saul. He would do what King Saul told him. He would go out and he'd lead the men, and they would have really big victories, and they'd come back to town and everybody would be cheering, and they loved David. He was a very popular man. So after one of the battles is when King Saul really started to turn against David. One day, when King Saul and David were returning from battle, the women came out to welcome them home. Now imagine kind of like a parade, a procession of all the warriors coming back into town after they'd been fighting against the enemy. And everyone saying, oh, it's King Saul, oh, it's David. But something that the women were chanting as they were singing and playing their tambourines and getting excited for everyone, something that the women were singing was a bit of a problem for King Saul. The women were singing, King Saul has killed his thousands, but David has killed his 10,000s. 10,000 is a lot more than 1,000. So King Saul got very jealous because pretty much they're saying that David is a better warrior than King Saul. So here David is getting more praise than King Saul. He was becoming even more popular than the king himself. So from that moment on, King Saul had it out for David. It didn't matter that David was best friends with the king's son, Jonathan. And it didn't matter to King Saul that David was married to King Saul's own daughter, Michal. All King Saul knew was that everything David had succeeded in, and that David was more popular than Saul. So he was jealous of him. King Saul didn't just want to send David out of the kingdom or banish him. He wanted to kill him. One day, David was playing the harp, and he would do this for King Saul. King Saul would ask him, play the harp for me, help me calm my nerves. But King Saul was overcome by his feelings about David, his jealousy and his hatred. So he picked up a spear and he threw it at David. But God was protecting David, and he was able to escape. Not long after that, King Saul sent his men to David's home to capture him. However, David's wife heard about this and helped David to escape. So now that's 2 times that David has been able to escape King Saul. So David escaped and went into hiding. Jonathan, the son of King Saul, told David, "Keep hiding until I find out what my father wants to do. I'll go find out whether he wants to still kill you or whether it's safe to come back." So Jonathan found out, and he came to where David was hiding and told him, "It's not safe to return. You have to go. You have to be hiding." So, so Jonathan and David told each other goodbye. They knew that David must leave and go hide somewhere far away. God had decided that David would be king. Remember that Samuel had anointed David as the future king. At this point, that must have looked impossible to David. Here, the king was trying to kill him, and he was going to have to leave the country and go into hiding. But God still had things in control. He had placed people in the right places to help David. David's wife had saved him. Jonathan had saved him. And God had his own timing. Often when we look at things and think they're impossible, God is working it all out. So this might happen in your life. You might think that something that God has said is impossible. How could God possibly take care of you because things are so bad or things seem to be so impossible? But there's nothing that's impossible for God. If you know God and if you trust in Him, then you can trust that He is able to take care of you. So I encourage you to put your trust in God and to talk to Him. And it's okay to be honest with God and tell Him, "God, I'm having a hard time trusting you because everything around me looks bad. Everything around me looks impossible." Think about David, the future king, hiding in caves and living on the run. That didn't look like the pathway to the throne. But yet, if you keep reading, you will see that in time, David did become the second king of Israel and went on to do many great things that God had planned for him. But if we looked at that one part of his life, we would say, this looks like maybe God's plan is going to be impossible. But nothing is impossible for God. So I'm going to share with you a fun little trick that you guys can do at home on another thing that looks to be impossible. Hey guys, sometimes we have a habit of putting limits on what we think God can do. We can trust Him for things that we could believe in or things that we can see coming to pass. But sometimes we have a hard time trusting in God for the things that we don't see how they're going to work out for us. So just as a fun little object lesson and something that you can do at home, I have here a regular bottle of water. It's just a glass jar with water in it. You could use a canning jar or a cup, whatever you have with a smooth top. And here I have just a regular index card. So I'm going to hold the glass jar. This is better to do over the sink just in case because you might mess up. I'm going to hold the index card on top. I hold it flat with my hand and I put it upside down. Let go. Did you see how it was able to hold the water in there? These are kind of flimsy index cards too. But here, let's try it again. Bottle of water, index card, flip it over. There we go. Cool. So there's just a little example of something that we might not think is possible. We might not see how that could happen, but sometimes God is able to do things that we are not able to foresee. I hope you enjoyed that fun little experiment. That's something that you can just do in your house with things that you have around the house. So give it a try. And I'm also going to add in the comments a link to a little maze that's going to remind you of the long and winding path that David had to take on his path to the throne. And sometimes it doesn't look like a straight line, the path that God has for us to travel. We might be looking around and saying, this can't possibly be God's will. Maybe God is not in control anymore. But God is sovereign. God is in control of all things. So I encourage you to put your trust in Him and talk to Him when you're discouraged.